Good morning, Grid Connections listeners, and welcome back to Grid Connections, where we explore how clean energy, electric vehicles, and the grid all converge. In this episode, we're joined by Rohan Puri. He's the CEO of Stable to unpack one of the most critical and overlooked parts of the EV ecosystem: how to make charging profitable and predictable. From the impact of rideshare drivers and adaptive pricing to why the best charger locations aren't always intuitive, Rohan shares powerful insights into how Stable is helping networks optimize placement and pricing with data-driven precision. We also dive into the future of EV charging, including vehicle-to-charger bidding, site intelligence, and the need to make charging as simple and seamless as tapping your phone. This episode is a must-listen for anyone deploying, investing in, or even just curious about the economics behind EV charging, or if you're just another EV driver who is always wondering, how can we make EV charging better? This episode is for you. But don't forget, Grid Connections Consulting is officially live. We're helping clients from utilities to charging networks navigate the future of electrified transportation. Learn more at gridconnections.co. Plus, enjoy the episode? Share it with one person who would love it too. And please leave a quick review to help others discover the show. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for more EV insights at gridconnections.fm/newsletter. All of these and more can be found in today's show notes. With that, enjoy. Thank you for coming on today, Rohan.
Thank you so much, Chase. It's great to be here.
For those who are listening who may not be familiar with what Stable Auto does, can you just give us kind of like a high-level background and maybe how they've interacted with it and not even realized it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Stable's mission is to make EV charging a profitable business. It's always been our mission. I think it's really resonated in the last couple of years, especially. The way we do it is we provide software that customers use to select strong locations or diligence potential charging locations, and to change and adapt their pricing in real time. So placement and pricing of EV chargers. We think that's about 80 or 90% of the way to profitability. Have good locations that attract a lot of drivers and then charge the right price at the right time, and you'll be well on your way. And so we basically have software with some algorithms and AI that leverages data from thousands and thousands of operating chargers across the country to help us understand what makes good sites good and what makes bad sites bad, and help our customers avoid those pitfalls.
And I know that sounds like it should be such a straightforward thing. And it's such a common topic we talk about on the show. But I guess at a high level, let's start with maybe some of the probably top 3 pitfalls you see, and then maybe we'll go into some more future-looking trends.
Yeah. Well, I think most charging infrastructure has been deployed with basically wherever is easiest. Which means like, where can we get permits? Where is there enough power? And then where it makes intuitive sense for people, which is like, okay, let's put them in like malls or grocery stores or things like that make sense, that match with the dwell time. And I think what we've seen with some of the larger like DC fast charging companies, especially, is that that strategy doesn't always work out well. It turns out the best locations for EV chargers isn't very intuitive. And the reason that Stable exists is because many of those companies have run into that problem themselves, where they're seeing, wow, some sites are totally underutilized, and some of the sites they didn't think would be winners are huge winners. And so what makes a good site is kind of a combination of things. People tend to think like, okay, EV penetration matters a lot and traffic matters a lot. Of course, those matter, but it has to be taken in context. If you have a lot of EVs that are registered near the site that you're looking to deploy at, well, it depends. How far are those vehicles driving every day? And where are they coming from? Are they coming from a home, a single family home, or a multi-unit dwelling? And where are they headed? Are they headed to a place with lots of infrastructure and office, like that has charging there? So it's not super intuitive to figure out where chargers should go. And that's why we've had to train a machine learning model that can predict what the utilization of a charging station will be. So we predict, basically what would the last 12 months of utilization have been if you had deployed at this location. And then you can use a bunch of algorithms to sort of forecast that out, calculate your energy costs, things like that. We also expose, a lot of really interesting insights around demographics and traffic and utilization rates of sites within your vicinity or within a region. But the goal is to give them tools to diligence a site that they're about to spend upwards of close to $1 million of capital for a given charging location. You're doing some basic diligence to make sure the utilization and the costs and those kinds of things are expected. So that was a long-winded way to say, one is it's not very intuitive. The second pitfall that we see is that just because a site has high utilization doesn't mean it'll make money. And that depends on your energy costs and things like demand charges. So it's not enough to just know how many people are going to show up. You must also know when those people are likely to show up and what the energy costs might be at those windows. Um, and then I think the third pitfall we see is that there's an over focus on competition, um, where you think you should not deploy where there's competitors and you avoid them at all costs. When in fact, what we observe is that when a competitor deploys across the street from one of your charging locations, both you and the competitor benefit from better utilization than you otherwise would have seen. And it's kind of like the dealership effect or the jewelry store effect or the QSR effect, right? But we've seen this time and time again. It's you see the whole location becomes more attractive. So maybe that's the third common pitfall. I'll add a bonus one. A fourth one is, we do a lot of work on adaptive pricing of charging stations. About 5,000, almost 5,000 chargers today are adaptively and dynamically being priced with the help of Stable. And that means like per location pricing and by time pricing. Most customers today, or most people in charging today, update their prices once a year or once a quarter. Just by moving to once a week, you should see double-digit impact in net margin. And if you're doing
Wow.
those price changes right, so it's very significant. And I think people are afraid to change their prices, but really, it's a big driver of demand. And there are some places where people are sensitive, and some people are much less sensitive to price. And you need to be able to take advantage of those effects to drive the right operating margin.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because, like, if you look at the EV industry and EV drivers, obviously we had the early adopters. I mean, go back a decade, supercharging and fast chargers really weren't even a thing. It was level two. And so we've really seen a lot of evolution and changes. So that has to kind of play into, especially when you're moving forward. One thing I'm kind of curious that we talk a lot about that's had a huge impact with utilization, especially, is rideshare drivers. And I'm kind of curious, are you seeing that in the modeling, or are there ways you can kind of focus for sites that are probably more rideshare heavy than others?
Yeah, rideshare turns out in some locations. I do think it's been exaggerated a little bit. It's obviously EV adoption and rideshare is still on its way up.
For
But there
sure.
are locations where, and there've been studies published where they've seen that rideshare driver use has been one of the dominant, if not the most dominant, indication of utilization in some areas. Those areas tend to be, like places where there have been programs for EVs, like in Colorado and California and things like that. But the point is the same: is that they can be a dominant factor. It's harder to optimize for it, and the reason for it is like your instincts might be to deploy where rideshare drivers are doing a lot of pickups or drop-offs so that there's a dwell time advantage. But then you also learn that there's a behavioral aspect that most rideshare drivers don't want to charge when there's a lot of activity, right? So they want to
Yeah.
charge at their lunch break or when there's a lull in activity and they want to do something while they're charging. So they'll line up to like a restroom or some other facility. And there are groups out there that are financing or deploying charging infrastructure to serve the rideshare segment. But the amenities matter a lot more. The other thing when we help customers with their pricing of charging infrastructure is that we notice there's a different sensitivity to price. It's oftentimes higher sensitivity to price from the rideshare or return driver segment, or sometimes like members and subscribers. Obviously, they're a little more sensitive to that price, but they're also more in touch with price. Um, and so they might be more or less tolerant. It really depends on price changes going up or down, but they're also willing to push their charge to a cheaper time of day. Whereas the average consumer is charging when it's most convenient, not when it's cheapest,
Yeah.
most of the
And
time.
I mean, I totally agree with you that it is kind of hard to track these and have like specifics right now because it is still also just so early.
Yeah,
But speaking from my own anecdotal experience, it does seem like if it's near a large airport, the charger, there's going to be a higher ride share, which once again
makes sense.
anecdotal, but makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the second is speaking exactly to your the pricing. I've had a couple of times where I'll roll into a charger, and when I get there, maybe I'm on a road trip and it's later in the evening. I might be the only one there. And
Mm,
then I look down and it turns 10 p.m. or something. And this happened to me once where I thought there was like some sort of car group show. Like there was just like 8 cars just all of a sudden just come out of nowhere. And it was in this completely dead parking lot. And all of them just plugged in. And I was on the phone talking to my wife and I was like, it's kind of like, wait, what the hell's going on? And I looked down
what's
and
happening?
obviously it just shows that right at 10, it dropped from like 30 cents a kilowatt hour down to like 12. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I mean, whether it's a rideshare driver or not, that is such a big price delta. I could see if you're definitely much more price focused, that's going to be when everyone just kind of shows up to take advantage of it.
Yeah, it does, and I think people maybe I think there's big swings. Obviously, there's big swings in energy cost, right? The price of your electricity
Yeah,
can vary 5 to 15x throughout the day, depending on the utility you're in. So it makes sense that the CPOs, the charging networks, would try to match that at the very least. But I think where I see this going much more broadly is I think the vehicle is going to start helping you make this decision for you. So you're not going to be looking at prices and trying to find the cheapest time and place to charge. This is an algorithm decision, and it's going to be putting out bids to all the chargers on route and finding the most convenient and cheapest charger on route and do that optimization for you. And maybe there's even bidding happening between the networks and the vehicles to sort of make sure everyone gets their, the charge that they need at the best possible rate at the best possible locations, and you're trying to do this optimization. But I think it's, especially as the world gets to more self-driving, autonomous, shared, the aces kind of things, we will see that. Who knows how far away that future could be, but I think it's
right.
pretty obvious. Your Tesla vehicle kind of already does that, right? So I think it's an obvious and easy optimization to make.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious about that because when you look at those kind of differences, obviously, especially in the price segment of it, and kind of like what you're talking about, the bidding, like, is this happening? I'm sure it's probably multi OS, but there's such a big difference between using a Chargeway or a plug share or a best route planner through CarPlay versus some of these native infotainment OSs. And usually,
Mhm.
especially if they're from the legacy, they're getting better, but there's a pretty big night and day difference with the quality of these recommendations. So I'm kind of curious. I'm sure your business is probably going to try to go through all these difference, but are there ones that you're getting more traction with this kind of integration level with?
Yeah, so we don't actually know. And the reason I say is that we typically work with a charging provider, the network itself. And that network's
Gotcha.
responsibility is to make sure the prices are on all the apps and
That
those
makes
kinds of
sense.
things. So we're just modifying their price basically. We're helping them with that recommendation.
So most of this has just been with the charging network level, and then
Yes,
they are the communicative layer between either the apps or the actual infotainment in the car to
you got
make
it.
these kind of route planning suggestions.
Hmm. You got it.
That's great. Looking forward now, I mean, kind of looking at some of these trends, like, are there any things really starting? We talk about rideshare drivers, but are there anything starting to really stand out between as we go from the early adopter to like whether it be a multifamily home EV driver or something, where maybe the charging consistency, especially for like level two, maybe isn't as easy. And are there things we're starting to see on your side from that for trends, or what are kind of the new things standing out to you?
Yeah, it's hard to say if there's sort of any major trends. I think a few things that we are starting to see, but it's very anecdotal. So I don't have any great stats to share with you or anything like that. But I will say that there is, with the public markets, like the regulatory market, pulling back on grants and subsidies and different funding programs for EV charging infrastructure. We're seeing more private folks deploy in that space. We're also seeing the fleet segment focus a lot more on light duty than medium and heavy duty. I think medium duty definitely has the potential. Heavy duty, of course, has a lot of potential, but we're still waiting for these vehicles to come out in big enough numbers, and we're waiting for the customers who are eager to electrify. And so on the fleet side, definitely see a light duty focus. On the charging infrastructure side, we're seeing more private sector interest into financing infrastructure, which is a sign of maturity. I mean, we know this is stable because customers use us to diligence sites all the time, right? We're like the diligence tool for predicting, forecasting demand and ROI and IRR and driving up asset value. Um, and so we tend to see that. And I think the last thing that we're seeing is um, a willingness to be more collaborative. I think in the early days of EV charging here in the US, I think networks were a little bit more close with their access. You could only access it through an app, their app, and it had to be, you had to be a member or a
Yeah.
subscriber or whatever. But I think the economic pressure is so high about getting utilization up, getting margins up, that they're now realizing they kind of have to do what we're seeing in Europe, which is just open up access on all the platforms. Especially with the pressure that Tesla has been providing and opening up their network to everybody in all the apps. I mean, you can now see live operating status of chargers on Google Maps, on Apple Maps, right? You don't only have to go to specialty EV charging apps or your infotainment system to see that. So that's just, I think it's a good sign of the industry and where it's going. But I think at the same time, the industry is sort of struggling to come to terms with the fact that one of the top goals I see constantly with these companies is we have to get to break even or profitable as soon as we can. And that wasn't the goal. Like 3 or 4 years ago, even nobody was worried about that. They were just trying to get new sites in the ground at an extremely high pace. But now it's different. It's like fundamentals economics, which is, the hand was forced, but I think it's a good thing overall.
No, that kind of makes sense. And I mean, you're even seeing, I think it was even Tesla the other day posted that they don't even do land lease exclusive. So, like, if other chargers want to be there, and it kind of plays to your point a little bit of just opening up among many different areas, whether it be in that case like the actual physical locations, but to also the back end and the software side of it.
Yep.
Um, with what you're seeing around kind of those changes, when we just our last podcast we had. Lauren McDonald and Bill Farrow of Paranon, and they were kind of talking about the changes in Nevi and
Hmm.
how you're seeing this change in more private investment. And they've kind of had concerns that, well, Nevi, part of the pro of it was to try and incentivize the places that weren't as necessarily profitable or straightforward to increase EV charging accessibility. And with this change to privatization, are you kind of seeing those changes being implemented, or are there ways that stable can kind of help for these private investments? Like, this isn't a more rural area, but this is going to be the best place to kind of get that optimization. I am curious to see what you're seeing around that and how that figures into some of these conversations.
Yeah, I think unfortunately what we are seeing is a refocus strategy where these charging networks are focused a lot more on utilization and profitability. And the
Yeah.
reality is that a site in the middle of North Dakota is just not going to do that well. Um, and so I do think that's the role of these programs and the tax credits, the incentive programs, is to incentivize deploying charging infrastructure in those locations. But we didn't deploy enough of it fast enough. And new administration put the brakes on it. And you have to put yourself in the shoes of these charging networks who are, they're feeling the pressure of they might not make it, right? They're feeling that like
Right.
really big strain around like we might not survive. We might get, delisted, or our investors might, drop out, or we might have to sell ourselves or whatever. And if you're in that mode, are you really going to deploy charging infrastructure and take a risk on utilization when you know that if you deploy in California, Washington, New York, Florida, Virginia, you're going to get a lot better utilization? Probably not. So yeah, it's an unfortunate um, effect, but you force the market's hand, right? But what else are they supposed? They can't just like take the L. This is not a nonprofit, right? They have to at least break even. And one of the encouraging signs though here is that clearly companies like EVgo have been able to show that charging is profitable, is a profitable business, and then it's possible to do it. And I think that's really, that goes to show like investor risk appetite is definitely low, but it's definitely better to see a real example of it for companies that have been around for as long as EVgo has, to be getting the utilization rates that they're seeing.
So I think it's kind of interesting because you look at, obviously Tesla's been around for a while. They do kind of have that national coverage. Electrify America was probably the first more public one to start trying to get that domestic coverage as well. And yeah, you're right. You're starting to see EV go, but it is still kind of spotty in areas. And I guess for me, I live on the West Coast. I've done a lot of road trips. And I do find when you look at all these different fast charging maps, there does seem to be this really interesting, it kind of speaks to what you're talking about exactly. Essentially divide like east of the Missouri River, there's such higher density. And of course, you start getting to more and more kind of like the traditional East Coast and even kind of East Midwest cities that there would be kind of the density to support that. And then you go west of that. I mean, especially like to your town about going through North or South Dakota or Wyoming, it is a bit of a charging desert. It's gotten a lot better for sure than even just a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, but it's still a bit of a desert. So I'm kind of curious, at least with, and I think that does make sense. And I mean, we are kind of getting to this point where we do need to see more competition, and the competition has to be in a way that it leads to financially sustainable businesses. Because as we've kind of talked on this podcast, I think for a long time it was like trying to find ways to get money versus now these companies are fully focused on how to make money, and some of that has been the market and the changes from the public investments. So are there, I guess I'm kind of curious in the conversations and like when certain fast charger groups are thinking about trying to get that east to west coverage. Are there any other kind of conversations you have around that, or anything in the strategy of like how to help implement that to maybe, because I mean you have kind of like Pilot and Flying J, and they have their existing base,
Hmm.
and that's interesting too because they do already have some of that coverage along the interstates. And so I'm kind of curious what you're seeing about, is it really kind of doubling down with regionalization right now with some of these fast charging, or are they kind of seeing those gaps and trying to make it so it is more national coverage?
I think I mean, it does seem like it's very regionalization, regionally focused. There are folks that are doing broader strategies around covering gaps or major corridors, highway corridors, and things like that. But it's certainly it's quite it's less, I should say, than maybe
Yeah.
a couple of years ago. Um, there isn't really, and it's sad to see it, but it's just the reality of the situation. We just can't take as much risk now if they don't know if capital is coming. And so they're going to focus where they know things are going to work, or where they know they'll still do corridors and they'll still take advantage of their prime time real estate, but they have to do it as a balanced portfolio approach. And that's what people use, Stable to do, is to figure out, okay, I'm going to have 80% of my sites be in this category, 10% super winners, 10% might be losers, but it'll be paid for by the remaining, the winners and the medium ones. And they sort of take it, just like investing, right? You can't bet on a certain
Right.
class of stock, but you want to hedge, you can, but you have to balance it out.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense. I guess looking to some of the things that other things that Stable does kind of help with. What can, because I mean, coverage has been one. The other traditional issue has been reliability. And I'm
Mm.
kind of curious with how Stable with kind of the back end communication platform has maybe allowed providers to kind of help with that reliability and just kind of create a better kind of end experience for the average EV driver.
Yeah, so we don't do as much on the reliability side, or at least not directly. We do help our customers understand when sites are broken, when they might not have seen it. And the reason we do that is because we're helping them with their price adjustments. And so you can use a tool in Stable to figure out, what is a good price, apply that price across thousands of locations, and then go ahead and set it, and we'll handle the whole flow of doing that, and then measuring like what was the response to that price change. And so if the price doesn't go through, or we get like a lot less utilization than we would have expected on that price change, then it typically means the charger might be broken or there's something else wrong, right? A road closure, like who knows. Um, so while we don't flag it directly and we don't really do anything about it, it is implicitly does show up in our dashboards.
Right.
Stable software is designed to be sort of independent of whatever hardware and software you're using. So if you're using, ChargePoint or Drives or Blink or EV Connect, it doesn't really matter. We can help you adjust your prices on any platform. We do have a partnership with EV Connect where we have more native controls of things and a broader integration plan for this year, um, which gives EV Connect customers access to the same capabilities, even if they're like a smaller site host. But the point being is that we're very focused on the like CPO's financial stability, and I think
Yeah.
the tricky part about focusing on reliability, candidly, is you know we a lot of people are focused on reliability, and I think, of course, it's a huge problem. Don't get me wrong; it's not like it's not a problem worth solving. It's a huge problem. Everyone knows it. Um, but it seems to be an isolated problem in the sense that it's isolated in time, and that naturally over time chargers will get more reliable, even if we don't do anything, right? Like the hardware manufacturers are incentivized for their sales to make sure that the chargers work better. And there's some clear hardware winners already. Like we know Tesla superchargers are better. Alpatronic seems to be doing well. I don't know what their reliability numbers are, but people tend to choose them for reliability. So there's already some winners. And the other problem with solving reliability, and you have to be honest with yourself about your economics and your company, right? A company that we have to make a profit, right? Um, is that in solving reliability, it's this weird incentive. If I make fewer and fewer chargers, or make more and more chargers reliable, I have less people to sell to. So it's like I make the market smaller as I try and solve the problem.
Right.
And so I don't think it's our job. I think it's better to align it to somebody who is incentivized to make reliable chargers better, right? And the other incentive is borne by the manufacturers, people who sell the hardware and the software, right? They want reliable so that they have retention and more growth, and they're known as
Right.
the most reliable chargers. Whereas if I do it, in solving this problem, my market shrinks, right?
No, I think that's a really good point and kind of a interesting dichotomy that
Yeah.
is unique to kind of what your team's working on. And I think I'm kind of curious with the pricing intelligence. I think that's really cool and such an important thing that kind of highlights the change from going from combustion technology to EV, where you do have just this strong software layer, and it's much more, instead of being reactive, proactive. When
Hmm.
I need to go get gas in my car, I go to probably whatever's closest or what I nearby, and maybe I occasionally price shop, but it's just what I think of. Whereas with the proactive layer of kind of this, especially when you're on a longer road trip, it is really interesting to optimize for that. And I'm kind of curious to get more into that. One of the things you guys mentioned is just how that helps for a CPO to improve net margins. And I'm kind of curious, one, just maybe unpack that a little bit. That makes sense. And I think a lot of people listening would be interested in that. But two, what are some of like I think when we look at current charging experiences, like let's use an EA, for example, there's you go up, you tap your card, that's the price. Now, if you have a membership, you save a little bit of money, and I'm sure that plays into it. But something that I think would be really interesting that I'm kind of curious if your team is able to kind of help with is so many of the people who really got into electric vehicles to begin with, and still to some extent, I mean, was the environmental aspect. And when we talk about pricing and time, a big part of that too is also where that energy is coming from. And I'm kind of curious if your company has looked at like leveraging premium for either buying clean energy like you can from your utility anyway, like paying extra for carbon, or just how that kind of works. And would just love to kind of get a little bit more unpacked of how it works today and maybe where you're looking to take that technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most in terms of how it works today, yes, it's typically there's a flat fee and then a membership fee. And then there's some chargers today, and a good number, I shouldn't say some, that have time of use fees. So like in this hour,
Right.
this window is this price and this window is this price. It's not truly dynamic in the sense that it's not changing week over week or season over season. And what I think we need to see is we need to see variability based on demand, right? If your site has a ton of lines and queuing, it's a high demand site. It probably means you should raise your prices. Of course, no driver wants a higher price, charging station. We get it. But in every other industry, when demand is high, we raise prices. When demand is low, we lower prices. It's
And
how
to
we
be
do
honest
things.
with you, I would rather pay a bit more. Like it's a pretty small incremental. And if that incremental means I don't have to wait in line, that
Yes,
premium is such a larger delta in value that I'm sold.
100%. And it's the same thing if your site is nobody's showing up, lower your price. Like
Exactly.
this is an obvious, thing to try. And I think we're a little bit too quick to try things like throwing battery packs on site and solar and all these things. It was like, wow, that's an expensive solution to the same problem, which is that your economics aren't very good. And here are other ways, much easier. You just type in a new number and you click save, and there you go. Um, Try that. And as long as you're really measured about that and you understand what your price impacts are, which is, what stable helps do is that run that constant experiment of pricing. You'll see that change. Now, in terms of strategies, like other pricing strategies we've seen or we could implement, we haven't looked into anything related to sort of emissions draw or climate impact. But I think one of the things we have that I thought is somewhat interesting, and it impacts the driver experience quite a bit, is another thing that CPOs do to help manage their costs is they do load balancing, right? So they throttle your charge at certain
That's a
times
good
of the
point.
day, right? They like throttle your power behind the scenes, in to preserve their demand charges or to reduce their costs. And actually, what happens there is the driver suffers, right? You get like a much slower charge because other people are also using it right now, and that sucks. It's like an awful experience. At the same time, you understand why the charging networks are doing it. What if instead you could have variable pricing by speed, meaning I can pay to have the full 300 kilowatt charge. I'll pay more. I'll pay, right now at peak, I'm desperate. So I'm willing to spend $1 a kilowatt hour for this charge and that speed. Um, but if I'm willing to charge and be throttled down to 50 kilowatts, I get passed down a discount and it's only cost me, let's say,
Right.
25 cents a kilowatt hour. Why don't, instead of like forcing throttling and balancing on the background, you incentivize it? So you say, yeah, listen, I will always give you the option to charge at full speed, but I have to charge you a lot right now. It's very expensive for me. Um, but if you're willing to charge slower and you're patient and you're willing to sit down for 45 minutes instead of 20 minutes, I can pass on this. It's up to you. So give consumers and drivers the choice. And I would like to see more of those types of strategies. We do it in again, these are all things we do in every sector. You go to Disneyland, you pay more to go in the fast lane, right?
Right.
It's the same thing, right?
And that actually is a really interesting analogy of how to, like, the fast lane. And I mean,
Yeah.
the vernacular works really well, of course, because we're talking about cars. But I'm trying to think of this like as myself and a lot of these listeners probably we're kind of EV nerds. So
Hmm.
like that clicks with us. Like, oh yeah, we'll pay the delta or we'll be cheap, whatever. How do you message that to someone who's coming from a gas world?
Yeah.
And that does kind of create a weird and possibly a bad experience. But I do like that kind of clear and simple messaging of like fast lane charging versus that. And you do traditionally have kind of like the premium fuel versus regular. So there is kind of that mindset. But that I think that is the challenge is around the messaging of it. And how do you make it so like someone who just bought this electric vehicle doesn't like, wait, you mean I have to pay now an extra premium to just charge what this car can do?
Yep. And
And
that sucks, right? It
yeah,
feels like you have to pay to do what it can do anyways, and it like the
right.
default is the slow, and it's like paying for high speed internet. You're like, wait, it could always do this. I just had to call you. It's the same with when
Exactly.
the Tesla vehicles had that like excess battery that you could tap into if you upgraded. Like,
Right.
wait, the hardware's already here, and I'm just. It totally makes sense. I think it's like maybe instead of fast lane or whatever or premium, it's maybe you think of it more as like priority, right? We're gonna fill
No,
you
no,
up before we fill anyone else up,
I,
right?
for sure. I totally get it. And I mean, the way I'm thinking about it from the customer standpoint is if I have to charge at this one location, sure, that kind of makes sense. And the fast lane premium, get it. And once again, if I'm at work or something and I'm just trying to charge my car, hell yeah, I'm going to do like a slower charge and it doesn't really inconvenience me.
Hmm.
I'm thinking of it more from like if I'm going also on a road trip, it's like, okay, why not? And because I've kind of seen this happen. And of course, I've even hacked it. It's like, why am I going to this charger? I should go to this next one. And that to me is where you can have that really smart thinking kind of software layer to just say, you don't really need to stop in the heart of San Francisco. You're trying to go out to, uh, I don't know, let's say Big Bear or something anyway. And let's try and get you out of the city anyway. And this is cheaper and essentially removes some of this um, kind of busyness at this one location. I guess that's what I know you get it. It's just
Yeah,
trying to figure out like how
100%.
do you do this in multiple ways to get that smart. And it clearly we're working towards that. But it
Yeah,
is really cool that that is kind of what your team is thinking about and how to approach it.
exactly. And I think that comes down to, again, I think if you create a bidding system between vehicles and chargers are just offering prices and vehicles are offering, driving or offering, batteries essentially, then you naturally create this incentive where the vehicle will say, I'm not that desperate for a charge in San Francisco because I'm going to Big Bear and I can wait
Yeah.
30 minutes. So I'm only willing to pay this much. And if anyone lets me reserve it and do it, great. If not, I'm going to skip and wait and I'll try again later. So I think this is an algorithm thing that we've seen in many other domains. We're just going to see it again.
And one of the other things I think is really interesting is like, and we've talked about this a little bit, is like measuring the performance of the site, and then maybe you see a site change where maybe it drops off, and like you were saying, maybe it's construction.
Hmm.
I'm kind of curious, like one of the conversations we've had a lot too is when you're going on a road trip, it's like, okay, there's an EV charger in Walmart, whatever. During the day, plug in, charge, go. Some locations, and I not to use the Walmart as the example, but some locations, they're totally fine during the day. But you roll up kind of at night or later at night, and you're like, this location's kind of sketchy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know from my experience, when I'm on like a road trip, I try like 800 to 1,000 miles in a day. I don't really care. I just want to get the charge and go. But I know for like my wife and other people, there is definitely that kind of security concern sometimes at some of these locations. And it goes to what you were talking about earlier, where people were just kind of throwing them wherever they could get them. Does do you Are you able to kind of pull back? Maybe not necessarily that it's the security feeling or the safety feeling, but like kind of interesting things we're saying like, wow, this charging location is packed from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. But then as the sun goes down, you start seeing a drop off, and maybe kind of it goes back to what you're talking about. There's that almost implicit kind of infer that there's maybe something. It's not just the price. There may be something else that's an issue with this charger.
Yeah, it's not something I have any like direct evidence of, but anecdotally we've seen times when we're like, what's happening here? What is this? And you can see it in the data. And it's a little bit unclear unless you're on site and you know that
Yeah.
site, what might be the effect. But there was a customer recently where we suspected they saw a big surge in utilization because of this is March Madness. Some March Madness game was happening and that's the only
Yeah.
road in or something. And we'd seen that. We're like, that's the only thing that would explain this big spike, and it's the same, on the flip side, right? Like, what explains it? Is it broken or is something else happening? I think it's interesting, a lot of our customers don't even have clarity on what is happening at their sites. Like, they know roughly how many kilowatt hours being dispensed, how many sessions per day, but they don't know if there's queuing happening. They
Yeah.
don't know if, like, how many charges failed unless they really dive into the data and figure out, okay, this charge is broken all the time, this one's not. Um, I think the queuing one is really interesting to me because that is something Tesla does know. Because the Tesla knows where the cars are, and they know if there's a
Right.
bunch of cars, there's 8 cars but 4 chargers. They know there's 4 cars queuing probably in that lot. But everyone else doesn't know that. They don't have that data advantage, and so they have to infer it. And so one of the things we've been trying to help folks think through is, how do you infer that queuing is happening? And one without putting like a camera or something on site. One way you could do it theoretically is that you could just see if charging sessions are happening in rapid succession, like somebody charges and then 5 minutes later another person charges, 5 minutes later another person charges. Clearly there's a line and backup there, but
Yeah.
you still don't really know for sure. So there's a lot of, back to your original question of like, when do you see these other effects? There's not that much, unfortunately, not much data on the sites. Nobody wants to put cameras on the site and sensors and things like that. It's weird, it's creepy. So we have to infer it from session data and usage, and it's not always perfect, but it's Tesla has a big advantage in that respect.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting, especially when you're talking about the automaker charging networks, because you're right. They know, especially in Tesla's case, and maybe like Rivian, where they have their own routing OS. And so they
Yeah,
know we're sending these cars here. These cars are physically here, and these ones are charging. So it must mean there is a queue.
exactly.
Do you, and it's interesting, you also mentioned the fact about like, it seems expensive to put a camera. And going back to our earlier conversation around like, while there's good intention, there's value to it, it is really expensive to put solar and to put batteries at these locations. Do you think that there could be a greater delta in value unlocked by putting a camera, or what are some like site upgrades that you talk to your CPOs or others about? Like, honestly, instead of doing this huge capital expenditure at the site, if you just did this, this, and this, you would
Yeah.
unlock so much value, whether it be through stable or just even like maybe a camera. I don't know. I'm kind of curious around that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's two things that get brought up a lot. One is internet connectivity is a big problem, where a major network has signed a partnership with, let's say, AT&T, and
Yeah.
because AT&T gave them a discount, but all their sites don't have coverage in AT&T territory, so they're like, oh, well, we made a mistake. And so now a lot of people are shifting to like signing individual data agreements with Verizon in this location, and whatever, T-Mobile in this one, and that definitely helps. Um, the second thing we talk a lot about is just making it easier to pay. So plug and charge, I think a lot of people know about and have talked about, but one of Tesla's biggest advantages, you don't have to do anything. You just plug the thing in and it goes. And right now there's usually like, there's a card reader, and then there's an app, and then there's also plug and charge, and it's confusing which one. Do you get different prices with which one? It's just so
Yeah.
confusing. And you don't have to think about that at all when you're fueling with gasoline. So it's actually harder to pay for an EV charge than it is to pay for a gas session, which is sad to see. So one of the things we always ask them to do is just simplify. I think what we're seeing, to be honest, is this effect of like CPOs really holding on to their differentiation and their brand and saying like, I want people to use my app and my experience and my membership and my subscription. I think the reality, this is just my opinion, but the reality is that I don't think long term people really care which network they charge at. They just want the most convenient location, the best price, just like we think about gas fueling. And I'm talking about supercharging or fast charging, right? Um, that's all you want. And what that implies is that maybe charging will be a commoditized business, right? The hardware and the software
Right.
experience are all roughly the same. And I think they're resistant to that effect. But if you look in Europe already, there's so much more, there's so many more CPOs. Every CPO has a partnership with like Hubject, or there's even
Yeah.
EMSPs. Like, they don't even have full control of their pricing anymore because there are all these apps you can use instead. I think the sooner networks get comfortable with that idea and make progress towards that, knowing that it probably will come one day, the better. And so the networks I think that will be most successful are the most open, the easiest to charge on anything, don't need an app, don't need a
Right.
subscription. They're charging prices, and their availability is available on every mapping platform, not just if you have their app, right? It's available anywhere. And it just maximizes for visibility and clarity versus anything else. So,
Yeah, I think that a lot that talks about like really two things that we discuss a lot in here. One is, uh, I mean, whether we're talking about the electric vehicle space or not, the old kind of entrepreneurial innovation thought is for something for a new technology to take off, it doesn't have to be just as good. It has to be better.
Yeah.
And right now, gas isn't great, but I can just tap my card, it works, and I go on with my life. And between the apps, I can get an argument for an app or something or the membership if it saves me money, because that is actually something you have with gas. But that's where you really do need to see like the supercharging or the plug and charge experience, where it's just put it in, walk away. Sure, you have to set up a card once, but I'll give it that. And even then, I've had an experience where I plug it in, it charged me, and then it sent me a notification saying like, "Hey, your card is expired. We need a new card," which is totally fine. But I kind of think for the experience to be good for a consumer, you kind of have to give the tie to the consumer. So if there's a
Yes.
failure on that card running or something, no matter whose fault it is, just let them get charged.
Hmm.
Because recently, and this is a network I have, it's more on the West Coast. I cannot stand in general. And also, they just have terrible hardware. Recently, I tested along the Oregon coast because it wasn't like I needed a charge. It just would have been convenient because we were going into a place anyway. And even though it was only 50 kilowatt, all of them always have a card reader. None of the card readers ever work when I try and use them. And so they always force you to use the app. And so I was like, okay, I'll do that then. And unfortunately, on my iPhone, I've got some setting where if I don't use an app for a long time, it just deletes the app. So I
Oh,
go to
yes.
pull it up.
Data.
Yeah, and because of where I was, there was no AT&T cell coverage, so I couldn't even download the app to do this. And I, like at this point, I'm just going above and beyond. Any other person would have just been pissed off and walked away.
Yeah.
And it just highlights exactly what you're talking about just like this terrible experience where, at the very least, just make the tap and pay function work. It's
Yeah.
got to be at least as good as a gas station. And we're really getting to that point where, yeah, you can just plug it in and walk away. That then unlocks a better experience that people will be more comfortable with and want to implement.
100%.
So sorry. Yeah, that's a rant
It
on
just
my side.
No, I mean, the fact is that you make it easier, it encourages better adoption, right? Like
Exactly.
if
Exactly.
you know that all, whatever this network has, tap and play, Apple Pay, and you can just do that and it works. And it's like, yeah, I'd rather just deal with that than have to deal with a card reader and all that nonsense of downloading an app. I think a really good example of this is, analogy. Have you ever ridden the New York City subway system?
Big fan. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, they have this Apple Pay, Google Pay thing now, right? Where you can just put your phone
Right.
down, whatever card you got. There's no app, right? There's no app. You just put your phone on the reader and it just charges you and you go on. And they even do this thing where like after you get to, I think it's beyond 12 rides or something, every ride from there on out in a week is free. So first 12 rides cost you money, and then after that it's free for any subsequent ride. So you're like incentivized to use it more and more after 12. But you don't have to handle it in the app. There's no app. It just
Right.
automatically does that stuff in the background for you. And so you don't have to think about anything. You just kind of, just the adoption is just crazy, right? Like even people who coming in from out of town, the fact that they don't have to
They have a
download an app.
phone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's already there. Just tap your phone. And if I use it more than 12 times, it's automatically getting me a discount. So I might as well try and use it as much as I can. It increases that adoption. So I would love to see strategies from networks like that, where you just literally there's nothing. You just tap your phone, it works. And then yeah, you'll get like there's no membership you have to sign up for to get a discount. But if you use this our network more than whatever 20 times a month, yeah, we'll automatically start giving you discounts and
Yeah,
promotion.
when I was in the UK a couple of years ago, the Underground had just implemented it,
Hmm.
and it's a slightly different, but more or less, yeah, you just tap it and it works. You don't even have to think about it. And
Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, as much as I love the New York Metro, and I'm so happy they've adopted it. It's such a pain in the butt when you're like in a rush or you're running behind for a meeting, and then you go to put your Metro card, and then you're like, oh crap, I'm out. I have to go reload it. You get in line, or the thing's busted. And so just going to that like level of just making the experience so much more convenient and just working for the user is so great to see.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, obviously, Ron, I think we could keep talking for quite a while, but I realize we're running up on time for you. Uh, for those listening, are there any other things you'd like to share, or just what's the best way for people to also engage with you and find out about any upcoming things that Stable Auto is working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best way is to find me on LinkedIn, Rohan Puri. We post regularly, like 2, 3 times a week, of data and insights about how to make a more profitable charging network. It's totally free. You can also check out our website, www.stable.auto. We actually publish utilization rates of chargers in the United States publicly, so you can actually access that information for free and get an idea for what usage rates look like in different states and locations today. Our mission, like I said before, is to make EV charging a profitable business. 80% of that problem is good locations and good prices. So if there's anything we can do to help, listeners who are deploying chargers, operating chargers, or even acquiring chargers, we're seeing a lot of that activity of
Yeah.
acquiring assets in the ground from private sector. Please let us know. We've been doing this sort of diligence now for at least 5 years of work in diligencing charging locations and helping this make the money move in this space. And it needs to, especially with this regulatory market.
Well, Rohan, thank you so much for coming on today. This is a great conversation. We'll have to have you on again soon. And I think just so many of the themes you hit on today were really things that are just so important to the space right now around, especially making it just easier for people to charge and having that better experience.
Yep.
But then also just kind of opening it up. And I think just for anyone listening, you are so right. Like, think about it. If people open up just make it easier to charge, we're at such an early point that you could become, if you're a different CPO, you could become the next Tesla supercharger, next really BP or Shell gas station. If everyone knows, okay, I don't really care about the price, I just know it works. They can get in, get out faster. They'll start using your service. So with
Exactly.
that, thanks so much, Ron, and we'll have you on soon.
Thanks so much, Chase. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Grid Connections, and huge thanks again to Rohan Puri for joining us. From shedding light on the critical shift from getting chargers in the ground to actually making them profitable. If you're in the business of deploying or managing EV infrastructure, there's never been a more important time to rethink site selection, dynamic pricing, and the user experience. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share this episode with a colleague or friend who cares about the future of EV charging too. And don't forget to leave us a quick review on your favorite podcast app. It helps others discover the show too. Also, stay ahead of the curve. Sign up for our newsletter using the link in the show notes to get the latest EV trends, insights, and updates from Grid Connections. You can find that at gridconnections.fm/newsletter. And if your team needs expert support navigating EV strategy, incentives, or infrastructure planning, head over to gridconnections.co to learn more about how Grid Connections Consulting can help you with your next project. Until next time, this is the Grid Connections Podcast signing off.